Bhumika is a writer and facilitator born and raised in the UAE. Her fiction and non-fiction explores how gender, urban spaces, and media operate in the Gulf, and has appeared in Jadaliya, Unutha Mag, and Postscript magazine. Her short story, Too Much Freedom, won the Mudun Prize in 2022 by Barjeel Art Foundation and Rusted Radishes. She has an MA in Media Studies from Pratt Institute, Brooklyn, and is currently working on her debut novel, something Razmeen and Bhumika you have in common. Next up, we have Noof Almazmi, an Emirati novelist and children's story writer who earned her BA in International Studies from Zayed University and MA in Translation Studies from the American University of Sharjah. She collaborated with organizations like the Dubai International Writing Program and the Abu Dhabi Arabic Language Center. Recently, she published the acclaimed sci-fi novel Between Two Memories with Kandil Publishing and the Dubai International Writing Program. And finally, we have Sultan Sood Al-Qasimi. All right, we have fans in the house. Sultan Sood Al-Qasimi is an Emirati columnist and researcher on social, political, and cultural affairs in the Arab Gulf states. He is also the founder of the Barjeel Art Foundation, an independent initiative established in 2010 to contribute to the intellectual development of the art scene in the Arab region. He has taught politics of modern Middle Eastern art at New York University, Yale University, Georgetown University, Boston College, the American University of Paris, Brandeis University, Harvard Kennedy School, Columbia University, and Bard College, Berlin. Sultan also recently completed a fellowship at Wissenschaftscollege zu Berlin. He is currently a research associate at SOAS Middle East Institute, London. Please join me in giving a warm welcome and a round of applause to our distinguished panelists. So, I've also got some slides that I'll be clicking along. Mudun, short stories from the Arab world, where this anthology, this book that we have 2 copies that have come fresh off the press from Lebanon today, actually. This book actually came about from the calls for submissions for an international competition for writing. It was the Mudun Short Story Prize. And I would love for Sultan and Razmeen, who were both on the panel of judges for this prize, to tell us a little bit about how the competition came about, what were you thinking, what did you hope to achieve out of the competition, and also the theme, focusing on Arab cities. So over to you, perhaps Sultan, if you can start, and Razmeen, if you can add in.
So thank you so much for being here, everybody. Actually, I was working on a book with an American editor called Todd Rees, a book that we called Building Sharjah. And we came across a building that was very interesting, but very problematic at the same time. It's called the Flying Saucer. And the Flying Saucer is one of Sharjah's most famous buildings, but we just could not find the name of the architect. So I spoke to Todd and I said, Todd, how about we invite someone to write a fictional story about this building? Oh. And we approached Deepak Unikrishnan. So Deepak Unikrishnan is a very famous writer based here in Abu Dhabi. He teaches at NYU Abu Dhabi. And he wrote for us a wonderful short story about a character. You should read the story. A character who moves around in Sharjah and visits the Flying Saucer building and plays a game of cricket in the Flying Saucer building. So it's sort of fictional, but based on a real structure. And I thought that's an interesting way of looking at our cities or looking at our structures in the region. And I reached out to Razmeen as well as the other co-editors, Faris Bseso and Reem Khorshid. And I said, let's work on this project. Razmig, you might have a different origin story. I'd love to hear yours.
I mean, it was during the pandemic, and you know, we weren't going out of the house much. So I was over at Sultan's place, and we were sharing stories by, I believe it was Ahmed Saadawi and Hassan Balasim, and they were both kind of like revolving around Baghdad. And they so clearly depicted the city within the work that it allowed, I mean, literature in itself is a kind of a platform that springboards and allows us to kind of travel in one place. And then Sultan kind of started sharing with me this idea that he had about, you know, also hosting a short story competition revolving around, you know, stories set in Arab cities. And from then on, we launched the project, and we weren't expecting this many submissions. I mean, we got somewhere around 100 submissions, and we were definitely caught off guard. But it became sort of like this weekly ritual where we would get together over Zoom every week and discuss these stories, take notes, and you know, it was therapeutic in a way. And you know, so many of the times we weren't even in the same country, and then we would be streaming live and discussing these stories. And that's kind of my origin story. I'd love to hear from the writers, actually. How did they respond to the prompt? And yeah.
Yeah, so for those who may not know, so Bhumika and Noof are, their stories were shortlisted. Bhumika's won first prize in the English side, and Noof's story is also part of the anthology, which was a very short, a very small number of stories that were finally selected to be a part of this anthology. So it's a huge achievement, and we're so glad that both of you are here. And so to just build on Razmik's question to each of you, the prompt for the prize was to write in fiction about an Arab city that you may be intimately familiar with. And each of you did this in very, very different ways. So perhaps maybe Noof, if you could start, and then Bhumika, talk to us about what your story was about, how you interpreted the prompt. Was it clear to you straight away which city you wanted to write about? And anything else you want to share?
So when I, got the opportunity to participate, I had so many options to write. I was thinking to write something in science fiction, something like, with a historical background, and maybe something that is social, like a story that will impact us in like every day. So my decision came because I had an idea hanging for a very long time. And like when I drive my car going to work, I see so many of these transportation buses. And sometimes you gaze into these windows and you see so many laborers sitting there together. Someone is sleeping, someone is listening to music, someone is laughing and engaging. Like that someone is the social one. And it could be like a few seconds, that bus would passes by. But then you always think, how do these people live? How do they think? How do they see our city? And I imagined like city like Dubai and maybe Abu Dhabi. And I gave that, the option to the reader to guess. And to see this person, the protagonist, how he's living, his hopes, his like aspiring to come to this city and live his dream, and the whole start to the end point for that person. And the story goes like into details about the life of this particular laborer guy, and it goes like from the beginning till the end. So yeah, the idea was to choose something that we see every day, but we don't really, pay attention to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was really, I wouldn't say surprised, but I was actually moved by the story of how you captured such details about this person's life. He's a cleaner who's come for the first time to the UAE, but even in India, where he's from, he's actually lived all his life in a village. So a city city life is new to him, and then Dubai, and just the kinds of things he's coming across, but also these very subtle nuances about how he lives. He loves to listen to music and dance as he's cleaning. During his introduction and his training, he's told to make himself invisible.
Yeah.
Don't catch people's attention, don't make eye contact, don't talk to people. And that really hit me, because I was like, that's so true. Sometimes we cross people who may be cleaners or blue-collar workers, so to speak, and we don't make eye contact, we don't smile, we don't say hello. I've seen people who go to other people's homes and they don't even look at the domestic workers. I've seen that as well. So for you to really put yourself in the shoes of this person and write a story where he's not some victim, you know, bad things happen to him, but he's dancing, he's listening to music. And at the end of the story, I'm not giving spoilers, but it's not like he's an alien in the city. He's almost like, you know, he's become a resident of the city, which I thought you did beautifully. Is there anything you want to say around that? Like, did you research for this story? How did you get into the head of this character?
Sometimes you use your imagination and you observe. Like when I see like the labor camp and they spread their laundry with the colorful, you know, laundry on the balconies, and you see them sitting on the pavement drinking tea together, and it's really hot outside.
Yes.
But they're still chilling, and then they're laying there and then they're napping on the grass. And there's simple like things that you see with your eyes, but you don't, you know, really think about much. And I did not, of course, had the chance to interact with a lot of them. But let's say at the office, there's the cleaner guy, could be my inspiration, and those people on the street, and like some people I had the chance to interview, inspired me to write. And I ask questions like, how do you live there? What do you do? How do you eat? What kind of things? And, you know, I made like this drama story that could happen, actually. Could happen to any one of them.
Yeah.
And I wrote about that. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we'll come back to maybe more of that later. Bhumika, if you want to talk about your story. And
yeah, sure. So I was born in Dubai and was raised in Sharjah. So I spent all my life in Sharjah. So that's clapping. Actually read that story that Deepak wrote for Building Sharjah, The Men That Glow in the Dark, right before I sat down. And it was a coincidence because I saw the prompt and I remember reading Deepak's story and I remember thinking very clearly that it was a Sharjah that I was very unfamiliar with. Deepak's character's Sharjah was very unfamiliar to me because some context, it's this college student, the protagonist in his story is a college student who roams the streets of Sharjah late at night. And I was like, I've never roamed the streets of Sharjah late at night, right? Because, and so when I sat down to respond to the prompt, I wasn't thinking about depicting Sharjah. I free wrote a lot. And what happened is the sites came really quickly. So I'll give you some backstory of the story, which is the editors described it as a coming-of-age story of a 10-year-old Indian girl who lives in Sharjah, and the story follows her, 2 aunts and her 2 cousins, and they just go from place to place together. And there's and it's usually these like quite touristy places in Sharjah. So the Gold Souk, for instance, if anyone knows the Sharjah Gold Souk, or the Smile You're in Sharjah landscape, like garden space. It's where people go to take pictures, but this was sort of the backdrop of my entire life. And when I sat down to write, those are the spaces that came up. So even the backyard of my building, you know, the rough parking lot, we used to take the sand from the parking lot and sieve it for Diwali Rangoli, you know? So it's all of these different connections to the land came up, not the city or not the myth of the city, but the land. And so I drew a lot on my own memories, but that was sort of, it was actually an incredibly easy story to write because it spilled out of me. It didn't take a lot of thinking. We'll talk about the sort of academic structure later.
Sure. No, I think it's so clear when anyone is reading the story that it is a very personal story. It may not be your experience per se, but like you're saying, the details in it are so intimate, like the sieving of the sand to make rangoli. Only someone who's done it would know that that's what you do, that you sieve the sand and you dye it different colors. And rangoli, if you're not familiar with, it's this pattern, this design that you make on the floor, and you might put like little lanterns or diyas in it, and it's different colors and people do different designs. But it's so precise as well, because if you mix it up or make a mistake, you can't just like take sand away or take away the colors. You almost have to start from scratch. And the way you described it, it's such a small detail in the story, but it really brings to life this migrant experience of an Indian family in Sharjah, a very, very particular experience. So that was beautiful. And like you were saying, you know, like a city is experienced so differently by people of different backgrounds. So like Noof was mentioning in her story as well, because of class, because of gender, because of other types of stratifications that we have. Citizenship status, you know, in a lot of Gulf countries, that comes into it. And actually in the stories in this anthology, that did come across, that, you know, who you are in a particular city is determined by so many of these factors. Coming back to each of you before I go back to Sultan and Razmik as well, when you were writing your stories, was there like an overarching thought or idea or an emotion that you wished to leave with the story, or that you wanted the reader to have when they finished reading your story? Did you want them to think a particular thing or feel a certain way? So Noof and Bhumika.
So the feeling I wanted the reader to feel is to be the protagonist in the story, is to be that person. It's like when a child would go to Disney World for the first time, they will be like, the child will be excited, really enthusiastic, until they reach, you know, with his parents to the Disney World. The same feeling, like when the protagonist reaches to this city, this city in the GCC, and and being anxious, sitting in the plane and, you know, waiting just for the airplane to land. That excitement, we don't have that. We don't feel that because it's like a, you know, a typical feeling, you know, normal feeling. But for that person, it's just like the whole, you know, collecting the money and the entire, like, you know, family knowing about it. It's a big deal.
Yes.
To be able to leave your village and go there, it's a really big deal. And I wanted the reader to feel, how is it like a big deal for that person to be able to travel to a developed country and to find a job there? And then when that person reaches to the airport and see the difference, how small the village airport, just like maybe a warehouse compared to something like a city, more than an airport to that person. And then seeing the city in that person's eyes is completely different. It's like being in a very fascinating dream, you know, something that is surreal, unreal for that person. But to us, it's just, okay, another well-developed city. You know, it's a beautiful city, but he is seeing something else.
Yeah.
So I wanted to capture that in the story.
And then very soon, sort of the disillusionment of that shiny city as well, right? The stratification of... So your story, for those who don't know, Noof's story is called Al-Masad Al-Zahabi, the Golden Elevator. And the title actually comes from this elevator in this office building, which is shiny and gold. And that's where all the office workers go in. But for the cleaners, there's another elevator, which is this very like dark, dingy space. And it's sort of like this image of this elevator, which this protagonist is always thinking of. Like, one day I'm going to walk into that elevator, right? And for me, that was what I was really left with. Hopefulness as well, that he's not sort of like knocked down by life, but also like he's aspiring for something. So that was really beautiful.
Yes, like in the story, he gets knocked down a lot, but then realize that he beats the city, you know, and he succeeds.
Yeah.
So that's the story. Like you come to the city and you beat the city, you have to, you know, or the city will eat you. So he struggled and he tried to make ends meet, not just by cleaning, but other ways. So, you know, being creative. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And Bhumika?
I guess I'll start with, so I started the story with the line, I was 10 years old. That's the first line of the story. I was 10 years old when I realized how lonely it is to be a woman. So I obviously wanted the reader to feel how lonely it is to be a woman. Just repeating. And I wanted the reader to follow this journey and understand what it is that was, what the loneliness was composed of. So I think the sentiment across the board is sort of loneliness, but also being surrounded by people. And in some ways, heartbreak. So the way that I wanted to approach it, because what you said about the migrant experience, 100%, but what I love about the prompt and also the fact that, we'll get to that, like it's called short stories from the Arab world, right? And I'm Indian. You would think the winner of this competition would be an Arab writer, right? So what I really love is the multiplicity of this collection, right? Of all of these different points of view, because it's not one story about a city. So it's not like my Sharjah is the Sharjah, or the Dubai Abu Dhabi that you're describing is the one. It's that so many different people experience the city in different ways. And with this story, what happens is the city kind of recedes into the background almost. And what you see is the interiority of the character, hopefully, and through the city. So I had the academic lens on it after I finished writing the story, because if you, what I've experienced is if I go in with the, you know, middle-class Indian migrant experience of whatever, what I'll end up with, at least me as a writer, will be quite formulaic. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
No, absolutely. And I think Noof and I were talking about this in the, you know, backstage before coming here.
Yes,
that
tell me.
You know, that when you're writing and you get too hung up on the research and having these like ideas of what you want your story to say, that actually you don't tell a very good story. So sometimes you just have to take a story and tell it. And then, like Bhumika is saying, then you go back to it and see, okay, what can I bring out more in this story? But you can't approach it with just, this story is going to achieve X, Y, and Z. You know, that's a research project.
I mean, so research is very important. Actually, my brother here is an historian, and he's a researcher in occult history, and he does a lot of research. But fiction is something different. It's like you take what you've researched, but then you have to come up with your own fantasy, with your own story, to make that background feels real. You don't need to make everything, you know, factual, but you need to create a feeling and turn that facts into something that's, you know, a possibility of a story, of, you know, create your own world. Be the person who plays with the chess. You move the chess, you move the story, and see it until the end. And sometimes writers like be surprised themselves when the characters beat them.
Yes.
You create characters in your stories, and then you feel like, how can I move this character? The character is very heavy, too complicated. How can I take that character to the next page? So sometimes the character defeats you, and you know, you have to be creative into moving the events to the next stage. So yeah, but being honest, when I was young, like when I was 15, 14, I always thought about the society, you know, what they will say. No, cross that word. No, you cannot say that. No, you cannot say that. No, you cannot say that. So you always think about the society and what like your family or your friends would think of you when you write, and that's a very hard thing to, just ignore. But when you are when you mature and with life beats you and you don't want to make friends a lot anymore, your friends become real and they're few, and you see the world like in an honest way with honest eyes, and you just express your feelings. You express how you really feel inside, the truth. Yes. Not the things that you try to, being formal or giving compliments to someone. No, being honest, being who you are. And then you will become a writer. And take your time and just let the events of the world just, slow down. When you walk in the street, you see a leaf falling from a tree, slow down. Look at that. A kid, dropped his ice cream on the floor. Slow down. Look at that. A young man, with his friends, I don't know, chatting in a cafe, or an old lady with her husband, and they're just sitting on a bench in a park. These beautiful images, they have a background story. Imagine that. Just imagine those people, their background story, where they came from, what they did in their life. How they become together. So you can imagine something that is not there, and this is how you build stories.
That's beautifully said. And actually, speaking of images, I also wanted to just mention that, the book has beautiful illustrations by a Jordanian architect and artist called Sara Al-Adele. And the one on the left is the illustration for Bhumika's story, very distinctly Sharjah, and the character was picking marigolds. And then on the right is the image for Noof's story, and it's the first image of, looking at this really, really developed city from an airplane window. So I think the illustrations in the book are stunning, and also the book quality and the production. So congratulations to both of you on creating a book which I feel is like a collectible item. It's a work of art in itself. Anything you'd like to say about that?
Yes, I need a minute. So first of all, it's not Razmig and I, it's Razmig Faris Bseisu,
yes,
who is a young Palestinian Syrian, lives now in New York, but he was a college student, born and grew up in Abuظbي, so yes, an Abuظbي kid. And he was a writer that I met when I was teaching at Georgetown. And he was working for the local publication of the university. And he was writing short stories. So he was equally important to this story, as well as Reem Khorshid, who's a friend of mine, whom I worked with as a researcher in building Sharjah. So it's not both of us.
Yes.
It's the four people.
Four of you,
and I want to say that when we put out the call for stories, we received 100 stories, as Razmig said, and we were meeting around 12 times, I think, and going over 7 or 8 and voting. So each one of us would vote on our favorite stories. We'd vote down and vote up. And then, for example, we tried to convince the person who didn't agree with us. So for instance, if the three of them liked a story and I didn't, then they'll convince me about its merits. Yes. So it was a very interesting democratic experience where we listened to each other. Sometimes there was a bit of tension between us, but I really think that we selected great stories. I also want to say thanks to CAF. This book is published by CAF Books in Beirut. They did a great job. Noor Salama, who sent this with her friend in Ajman yesterday. So this just arrived. I've never seen it before in my life. And the designer, Natalie Elmir, and the illustrator, Sara Adaile. And I also want to just say one more thing. The multiplicity, the word that Bhumika said, this book has stories by a 16-year-old and an 88-year-old.
Wow.
So there's a woman who was born 1933. From Baghdad, and she talks about her story growing up in Baghdad in the 1930s and 40s, and it's a real story. And can I just say, with the risk of giving out too much, that it was a very raw story. It was literally as though somebody recorded themselves saying, when I was young, there was this Jewish family living next door, and I used to sneak and look at the parties that they had and wanting to go visit. And then my father went to Germany. He was the first person to study. So it was a very personal story, Razmik. Layla Kubba, and she was born 1933. That makes her, what, 91 now? 91?
Wow.
So we had a story by...
Don't put me on the spot with math.
We had a story by a young Gazan girl who wrote about her bookshop that was destroyed in 2021, Razmik. It was literally within weeks of the bookshop being destroyed. And she wrote a story of a young girl walking to her bookshop and not finding it. And and you wonder, if you think about what happened in Gaza in those days, it was horrific destruction, and now that looks like it was just
nothing.
Not nothing, but it was the scale of destruction. So anyway, this book is a labor of love that took Razmik, Faris, Reem, and I 4 years. People do their PhDs, but it was really a collaborative effort. You try to work with 4 people in different countries and try your luck. So it's a lot of work. So I just wanted to say thanks to Reem and Razmik and Faris as well.
No.
I mean, it's quite surreal to be holding the book. We only about an hour ago kind of tore open the package and removed the book from its folder. And I found myself even now sitting down here. I keep reaching out to the book and touching it, making sure it's real. But I mean, what I think everyone else here has mentioned about this notion of multiplicity, I think with the call, I mean, there were specific key lines is show us the city as you see it, as your character sees it. By no means is the prompt a confinement to realism. Sometimes, you have to kind of tread towards the surreal, towards fantasy, to kind of unearth this ineffable truth. And I think the 19 authors within this collection very much did that and gave us this this kaleidoscopic. I mean, there's quite different relationships each author has to their city. There's authors here who are hypercritical and have this sense of angst towards the city they live in. In other cases, it's romanticization, appreciation. There's a story about a tourist in Cairo and just scared of crossing the street. There's the heartbreak in Gaza. There's a tour guide in Jerusalem. There's it's just, there's no end to it. And even if you know the city, I mean, in Bhumika's and Nof's cases, I mean, many of us have been here, have been to Sharjah, have been to Dubai, but they present such a different perspective that you may not be familiar with. And it's this notion of offering this kind of tapestry of this sense of multiple, this kaleidoscopic ownership of a city, right? Where multiple people, and each one is as valid as the next, have a perspective of the city and a sense of belonging, and each one is as valid as the next. And that's really, when we made the prompt, we didn't want a kind of an architectural rundown of the city. Rather, we wanted this emotional exploration of a city. And I think the authors in this collection very much did that.
Absolutely.
Can I just add that one of the cities is a refugee camp?
Yes.
So it's not just the cities of concrete and the glass buildings. So this is what life feels like in a refugee camp, through the eyes of this character going from tent to tent, looking for utensils, cooking equipment. So a city is what you call home.
Yes.
And we forget there are people from the war in Syria, refugees, who've been living in these encampments since 2012. So you're looking at 12 years. If a kid was 5 years old, they're today 17, 18. It's their entire life that they spent in that refugee camp. So we try to expand the idea here of what a city is, or what a home is.
And I think the stories in this collection really do that in terms of also making the reader question their idea of what a relationship to a place could look like, through these different settings. Was there anything in these stories that surprised you, something really unexpected? I mean, that story from the 88-year-old writer, I mean, receiving something like that must have felt like a gem or, you know, something very unexpected.
I kept checking the date of birth. Is it really true? 1933? Could it be 73?
Wow.
Could it be
Yeah.
19? And of course, you know it's her story because she talks about before World War II. You know,
Yes.
she talks about the first doctors that came and the first medical whatever clinic, and it's really a time capsule of Baghdad in the mid-20th century that you're missing today. I want to answer your question about what was surprising for me. The number of dystopian stories, the number of the city is destroyed and now we're sort of looking for, our livelihoods and trying to find food. So that was a number of stories that came up. The post-apocalyptic, the stories, what did we say? Climate change.
Yes.
Climate change is a big deal here, climate change. What else?
Certain parallel symbolisms, like this being drawn towards the water for escape.
Yeah.
I think that rang in a number of
stories. People look towards the water in Morocco, in Lebanon, in the UAE. So there was a story about a person who works in a
she's studying
morgue.
Yeah,
morgue.
She's studying in a school, and they're basically dissecting a body.
So
here's the dad talking to her, and
Yeah, that was a really disturbing one with the smell of the cadavers in the air all the time and on their clothes. Yeah, maybe it had something to do with like this sort of like either looking towards the water, almost like escapism, or a post-apocalyptic world. Also with the timing, like although none of the stories are about the pandemic per se, but you can imagine people writing during the pandemic. Either you're thinking of the world is mad, or you're thinking, what really brings me comfort and joy and childhood memories and water? And, you know, so it's interesting.
I mean, that parallel you just mentioned was drawn. Like there were stories that started out with the water being the sense of like, you know, a symbol of a bygone, more comfortable time, and then resulting in being this medium of escape. So that parallel you mentioned was actually depicted almost verbatim in the story.
And in both Bhumika's and Nof's stories, there's a paragraph that hits you in the heart. It just, you wish that you didn't read it. You wish that, I wish it wasn't written. I wish I could change it. But then that's the character. And I mean, this was really very, very powerful. Their stories we all agreed on. I could say it as me.
I was going to ask. I wondered if you had recorded the sessions where you were voting, because I would love a copy of the recording.
No, with your story, Bhumika, I was afraid that I liked it because I'm a Sharjah guy, but it wasn't that. They all agreed on it. We all agreed on your story, and Nof as well. We all agreed on that story. There were some stories where Faris would, you know, he's a younger person with like, he had different points of view, and I'm sort of older, and I'm like, oh, things should be different. But I think ultimately I compromised, Razmi compromised, Faris compromised, Reem compromised, and I think we came up with the best possible selection from the 100 entries.
Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about structure and then open up to questions. So in terms of having this prize, being a part of this anthology, what did that mean to the writers specifically? And what does it mean to have this sort of like platform or structure provided to you as a writer? So maybe Bhumika, if you want to start, and Nof, feel free to add.
Of course. So very familiar with the writing infrastructure or the creative infrastructure in the UAE. And we don't have a lot of this, right? But it's a really, really beautiful time because I can now say we do have a lot of this. I grew up saying, nah, you know, but it's also a really exciting time to be making in the UAE because you see the impact that one book can have. So I'll talk about it personally for me as a writer. I was writing before I submitted to the prize. But what it does is it gives you validation. And for me, a lot of it is I write about the UAE and from the UAE, right? And so it was almost like, yes, you are a UAE writer, right? And it was validation in that sense. Shortly after this story is when I started working on the manuscript. So I think these small moments of, and they're not small at all because the impact is massive. I think I say small because they may seem small to someone. I don't know. They're very, very big. It gives you a nudge in the right direction. And when there's supportive infrastructure, the growth is unprecedented. And you're seeing that a lot across the board. So there's stories coming from Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, all of these emirates that we've not seen before. And you've got, myth-making happening about the city, which is very well funded, right? And you've got, I think, very skewed perspectives, especially when it's Western authors talking about this country, right? So it's a really, really exciting because we have a lot of emerging writers now. And that's because of stuff like this, like these incentives, these little, we are taking ourselves seriously.
Yes.
And our stories are important.
I think it's also, especially for expat writers, there's this new generation of children who've now grown up and who look at these societies as their own. Deepak Unikrishnan, who you mentioned earlier, in his bio, he says, Deepak Unikrishnan is a writer from Abu Dhabi. And he said initially when he wrote that line, he got pushback for it. He said, you can't call yourself as a writer from Abu Dhabi. That would mean you're Emirati or you're local. And he said, no, that just means I'm from Abu Dhabi. This is where I'm from. And like you're saying, you're a writer from the UAE. And with collections like these, I feel like there's that ownership of different backgrounds and people who are from the Arab world, but could be from lots of different backgrounds. So that's wonderful. Noof, anything you want to add to that?
The thing is, because my story is within UAE and not the entire Arab world, but something about UAE is when I say, okay, I'm from UAE, I'm an Emirati, but UAE is not just that anymore. UAE is not just the locals. UAE is all the expats, and whether you like it or not, we are together living in this country and in harmonious. And UAE belongs to everyone. Everyone's has an identity in this country. And people just say, I'm from Dubai, I'm from Abu Dhabi. And that's true because they lived most of their lives here. Their kids were born here, they go their schools here. And I'm sitting at my office and my colleague is from Chennai. And he is like, hey, would you like to try this something called igloo? And you eat it with coconut, something like chutney. And I'm like, I am sharing someone else's, culture and food, and learning about his life and his family. And he's my colleague, and I have other friends from around the world, and they're all from UAE. And when they say we are from the UAE, they are from UAE. Yeah.
Absolutely. So on that beautiful note, if we can just open up for questions. I think we have about 10 minutes. So if you have a question, please, if you can raise your hand and a member of the team will bring a mic to you. So the lady in the first row, if there are any mics to go around. Otherwise, if you want to shout out your question. Okay, we've got a mic to you. Okay. Perfect.
Assalamu alaikum. If I can just ask the question in Arabic.
Absolutely, fine? Absolutely.
Yeah. معكم مريم محمود، محررة نشر علمي، كاتبة قصة قصيرة وطالبة دراسات عليا في الأدب. أنا سؤالي الآن هو بخصوص العنوان وراح أوجهه للدكتور. العنوان هو مدن short stories from the Arab world، يعني وهذا يمكن هي النقطة اللي أثيرت الآن. أنا يلفتني فعلاً أن نحن ربما بصدد خلني أقول تعريف الهوية، وهذا شيء جميل فعلاً، لأن نحن قاعدين نخرج من فكرة الأقطار بمعناها البحت، قاعدين نروح لمعنى مختلف جداً، أن نحن نشوف آخرين من جنسيات خلني أقول أخرى يعبرون عن هويتهم أياً كانت، بغض النظر عن خلني أقول ما يمكن أن يكون تصور مبدئي. يعني هل يمكن أن هذا يكون تعريف جديد للهوية؟ ويلفتني أيضاً أمر آخر، أن العنوان نفسه يبدأ بالعربي مدن، وهذه إحالة على الإمارات، وهي يعني بطبيعة الحال دولة عربية. فأين نحن من هذا؟ وتحديداً يمكن هذا الأمر يعني، أو هذا السؤال أثير في ذهني، أن نحن في الدراسات الأدبية والنقدية، وأنت أدرى دكتور، دائماً يكون فيه توجه لي يعني خلني أقول تخصيص الأدب بطريقة ربما تكون ضيقة. فما هي رؤيتك في هذا الجانب؟
شكرا لك. القصص هذه يعني مكتوبة باللغة العربية واللغة الإنجليزية، الكتاب متساوي تقريبا، ولو أن في عدد قصص أكثر باللغة العربية. والكتاب أيضا هم عرب وغير عرب، ولكنهم يقطنون في العالم العربي. وأنا أتفق معك بأن نحن لازم نعترف بأن في جنسيات غير عربية ساكنة في العالم العربي، في دول مختلفة مثل لبنان ومصر والدول الخليج، فيها عدد كبير من الأشخاص اللي هم غير عرب الإثنية، يعني عنصرهم الأصلي غير عربي، ولكنهم عايشين لسنوات كثيرة في هذه المدن، وصاروا هم جزء من هذا نسيج هذا المجتمع. فنحن حبينا نرحب فيهم. والكتب يعني القصص هذه يعني لم تسمى قصص من عرب، ولكن قصص من العالم العربي. فنحن حبينا نفتح الأبواب لهم يعني ونرحب فيهم. وصراحة من أكثر القصص اللي كانت ملفتة لي أنا اللي كانت تكتب من أشخاص غير عرب عن هذه المدن اللي هم عاشوا فيها وكبروا فيها، مثل ما تفضلت الأخت نوف، وصاروا جزء من المجتمع فيها. فيمكن هذا تعريف جديد. وأنا ممكن أقول لك أن في قصص كثيرة حبينا انها نضيفها في الكتاب، ما قدرنا. في قصة مثلا ايضا باللغة العربية، الكاتب سحب القصة لانه هو حب انه ينشرها بنفسه، قصة عربية تذكر رزميك. وفي عندنا مثلا قصص ثانية مكتوبة من كتاب اول مرة يكتبون. فنحن يعني حسينا ان هذه فرصة ان نشجع كتاب جدد، كتاب أول مرة يكتبون قصص، لأن ما كان القصة مثلا طويلة 10 أو 20 ألف كلمة، 3000 كلمة، 4000 كلمة، كانت بسهولة ممكن الواحد يكتبها. فأتمنى مثل ما تفضلتي أنها تعريف جديد للعالم العربي، تعريف ثقافي ومش تعريف سياسي للعالم العربي. ومثل ما تفضل زميلي رزميق، كثير من القصص من مدن مختلفة من العالم العربي، ولكنها مدن من البحر، فكان فيها نفس الرؤية للبحر، مثل غزة، مثل اسكندرية، مثل بنغازي في ليبيا، ومدن أخرى الرباط، وين أيضا بيروت والخليج. فهذه القصص كلها قصص من العالم العربي، فيها نفس الروح. ما أقدر أشرح لك كيف، وأنت تتكلمين إنجليزي، فأنت ممكن يعني أنت من المحظوظين أنك ممكن تقرأي الكتاب بالكامل، لأن احنا ارتئينا أن لا نترجم هذه القصص. كل قصة مكتوبة ومنشورة باللغة التي تم يعني كتابة القصة فيها. شكرا.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? Okay.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Okay. Ahmed Mazmi, thank you for the shout out, and congrats guys on this superb compilation. I'm curious about the literary form of short story, because most of the works on cities are novels, and they think of novels as cities and cities as novels. Like you have novels on Riyadh, on Kuwait, on Muscat, and so on. What are the challenges that you would face in trying to capture the sense of belonging that you have to the city through a glimpse that you can depict in a short story, right? How much of that sense of belonging and intimacy and familiarity and rootedness in a space you can bring in such a short literary form?
I want Razmik to answer that maybe, and the others, but I just want to tell you that one of the conditions we had for the short stories is people mention actual streets and actual buildings to make sure that they didn't write it about some international city and they adapted with Google links, Google Maps links. I want to see that building. Where is that building that you talk about? So that we try to be very, very specific, so to capture the essence of the city. Sorry, Razmik, if anyone else wants to answer.
I mean, short stories in general are a lot harder, in my opinion, to write than a novel, because you have to be extremely focused. There's no room for any, extra ornamentation and things like that. So there's a precision that's required. But at the same time, I think with a short story, it still allows for you to delve to significant depth of interiority, as our authors brilliantly did. And there's nothing like validating a perspective. I mean, literature in its essence, I think, compared to other media, is allows for a lot more you taking the place, the inner workings of a character, and there's nothing like validating a perspective than living through that interiority yourself. But I'm sure I'd love to hear from our authors how they responded with the short story, and whether the form in itself was constrictive in exploring those themes.
I'm not sure I'm the right person to speak to this because I love the short story form. It's my preferred. I'm working on the book, but it's a lot harder. So I think I have the opposite view. But I think what the cool thing about the restriction of like one of the things that one of my writing instructors would say is the more the restriction, the greater the space for creativity. Because the smaller the canvas, you know exactly what you need to put in and what you need to leave out. So I think short story allows for a lot more depth, while like in a novel or whatever, you'd have more breadth, right? And also you have a very small amount of time to make an impression. So I think the reason short stories are my favorite is because there is always a gut punch element, right? Like there's always a moment where you're like, this is why I'm reading this, you know, which I love. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, I agree. The punches are really important. The person who asked the question is my brother, so I can answer you later.
Thank you. I mean, it's a brilliant question, and we could actually spend so much time on just discussing that. But we're out of time. I would love for you to join me in thanking our wonderful panel of speakers this evening, the team at Abuظbي International Book Fair who've been brilliant, the volunteers, the IT team, the room managers. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.